The amber glow of the hydraulic warning light had been blinking for 6 minutes when Captain Maya Chen decided it meant nothing. She had seen worse in training, had nursed aircraft with more serious problems back to runways in Arizona, and the A-10 Thunderbolt II beneath her was built to absorb punishment that would kill any other airframe in the inventory. One flickering light in the left hydraulic system was not going to cut her patrol short. Below her, Highway 1 carved through the brown Afghan landscape like a scar, and the supply convoy she had been escorting for the past 2 hours was now safely inside the wire at FOB Sharana. Mission complete. Routine. Forgettable. Just like every other mission she had flown in the 4 months since her transfer from Luke Air Force Base. If you're watching this from Arizona, where these warthogs are stationed at Davis-Monthan, or maybe you served and know exactly what that hydraulic warning light feels like in your gut, drop your location in the comments below. Her radio crackled with a transmission from her wingman. Reaper 1, this is Warhorse Control, Lieutenant Briggs reported, his voice carrying the barely concealed excitement of a pilot about to get what he wanted. You are directed to proceed to Grid Reference Force Center for CAS support. Acknowledge. Chun listened as Briggs acknowledged the order and banked his aircraft west without so much as a farewell transmission. She understood. Close air support was real flying, real combat, the kind of mission that built careers and earned respect in squadron-ready rooms. Escort duty was what you gave pilots you did not trust with anything else. Reaper 2, Warhorse Control. The voice belonged to Major Derek Hollins, the operations officer who had been running the duty desk at Bagram for the past 6 hours. Chun recognized the particular brand of condescension he reserved for her. You are ordered to return to base immediately. Acknowledge. Chun keyed her radio. Warhorse Control, Reaper 2. I have 40 minutes of fuel remaining and my assigned patrol sector is not yet complete. Requesting permission to finish the sweep before RTB. The pause that followed lasted long enough for her to complete a lazy turn over a village that looked empty from 15,000 feet. She had learned to read these silences. They usually preceded the word no delivered in a tone that suggested she should have known better than to ask. Negative, Reaper 2. Hollins replied, we are tracking your hydraulic warning from here. You will RTB immediately and have maintenance inspect that aircraft. We do not need you nursing a wounded bird into a mountainside. Acknowledge. There it was. The assumption wrapped in false concern. The suggestion that she could not handle a minor system fluctuation that any pilot with her hours would manage without a second thought. She had 2,000 hours in the A-10. She had instructed pilots who now flew combat missions while she orbited supply convoys. But one amber light, and suddenly she was a liability. She glanced at the warning indicator. The pressure had actually stabilized in the past 3 minutes. The system was functioning within acceptable parameters. But Hollins had made his decision from a desk 60 miles away, and arguing would only confirm whatever he already believed about her judgment. Reaper 2 copies she transmitted. RTB. She banked the aircraft toward Bagram and felt the familiar weight of surrender settle into her chest. For months of this, 4 months of watching male pilots with half her experience get tasked to the missions that mattered while she flew circles over trucks and counted the days until her next assignment review. The A-10 responded to her inputs with the solid reliability that had made her fall in love with the airframe during flight school. It was an ugly aircraft by any aesthetic standard, with its twin engines mounted high on the rear fuselage and its massive Gu-8 cannon protruding from a nose like the proboscis of some prehistoric insect. But it could take damage that would destroy a fighter jet and keep flying. It could loiter over a battlefield for hours while faster aircraft burned through their fuel in minutes. It was designed to save lives on the ground, and Chun had trained her entire career to do exactly that. She checked her instruments out of habit. Altitude 15,000 feet. Airspeed 280 knots. Heading 045 toward Bagram. Fuel sufficient. Hydraulic pressure in the left system holding at the low end of normal. The radio frequencies hummed with routine traffic. Other aircraft checking in with controllers. Weather updates. Logistics coordination. The ordinary sounds of a war that had been grinding on for over a decade. Chun listened without engaging, her mind already moving toward the maintenance debrief she would endure when she landed, the paperwork she would file, the hours she would spend in the ready room waiting for another escort mission that would lead nowhere. Then a different voice cut through the static. The transmission was broken, desperate, and broadcast on the emergency frequency that every aircraft in the theater monitored. Any call sign, this is Viper 6. Troops in contact. Grid reference 337. Requesting immediate close air support. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. How copy? Chin's hand moved to her navigation display before her conscious mind had processed the words. Grid reference 337. She knew that valley. Korengal, one of the most dangerous pieces of terrain in Afghanistan. 40 minutes from Bagram by helicopter. She was 12 minutes away. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb had been in firefights on 4 continents, but he had never heard his own voice sound the way it sounded now. The words came out raw, stripped of the calm authority he had spent 15 years cultivating. Viper elements, fall back to the rock line. Move the wounded first. Rivera, give me anyone on that radio. The Korengal Valley had become a killing ground in the span of 90 seconds. His 12-man ODA team had been 40 meters from their extraction helicopter when the first RPG streaked out of the tree line and turned the Black Hawk into a fireball. The pilot and co-pilot were dead before Webb could process what he was seeing. Now his team was pinned behind a formation of boulders that provided cover from 3 directions but left them exposed to the ridgeline above, and the Taliban fighters who had sprung this ambush knew exactly how to exploit that weakness. Rounds snapped overhead, close enough that Webb could feel the pressure changes against his face. He pressed his back against cold stone and conducted a mental inventory. 12 men. 2 wounded, one of them badly. Perhaps 6 magazines per soldier. No air support. No extraction. The QRF at Bagram was 40 minutes away, and his team would be overrun in 15. Specialist Rivera crawled toward him with the radio handset, his young face tight with controlled fear. Sergeant, I have Warhorse control. They are saying the nearest fast mover is an F-16, but it needs JTAC coordination and the relay time is going to be 20 minutes minimum. Webb grabbed the handset. 20 minutes was a death sentence delivered politely. Warhorse control, this is Viper 6 actual, he transmitted. We do not have 20 minutes. I have 2 wounded, 1 critical. We're taking fire from 3 positions, and they are maneuvering on our flank. I need air support now, or you're going to be calling 12 families tonight. How copy? The response came back with the bureaucratic calm of someone who was not currently being shot at. Viper 6, we copy your situation. All available CAS assets are currently tasked. QRF is spinning up, but earliest arrival is 3-9 minutes. Recommend you consolidate position and prepare for extraction at that time. Webb wanted to throw the radio into the rocks. Consolidate position. As if they had anywhere to consolidate to. The helicopter wreckage was burning 200 meters away, sending a column of black smoke into the sky that was advertising their location to every hostile fighter in the valley. His team was bleeding ammunition with every exchange of fire, and the enemy knew they just had to wait. Staff Sergeant Reyes appeared at his shoulder, blood running from a gash above his eye. Boss, they're moving through the southern tree line. Maybe 20 of them. If they get to that ridge line, we are done. Webb nodded. He had already seen it. The Taliban commander on the other side of this fight understood terrain and timing, and he was executing a textbook envelopment. In 10 minutes, his team would be taking fire from 4 directions instead of 3. In 15, they would be overrun. He keyed the radio again, this time on the emergency frequency that every aircraft in the theater monitored. It was a desperate move, the kind of thing they taught you never to do because it cluttered critical communications channels. But Webb was out of options that came from a textbook. Any call sign, this is Viper 6. Troops in contact. Grid reference 337. Requesting immediate close air support. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. How copy? Static answered him. Rivera was scanning frequencies on his secondary radio, searching for any traffic that might indicate help was closer than 40 minutes away. Then Rivera's expression shifted. "Sergeant, I have an A-10 on the Warhorse frequency. Call sign Reaper 2. She is 12 minutes out, but Bug Grom just ordered her back to base." Webb filed that detail away without comment. He did not care if the pilot was a woman, a man, or a trained chimpanzee. He cared that there was an aircraft 12 minutes away with a 30mm cannon that could turn this fight around. "Give me that frequency," he ordered. Rivera read off the numbers, and Webb dialed them in, his fingers working the radio with the precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times under fire. He took a breath, forced his voice into something approaching calm, and transmitted. "Reaper 2, this is Viper 6. I am monitoring your traffic. I have 12 Americans pinned down in the Karengal Valley, and we're going to die in the next 15 minutes without close air support. I know you have been ordered RTB. I'm asking you to disregard that order. We need you. How copy?" The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. It felt like 3 hours. Around him, his men traded fire with shadows in the tree-line. Brass casings accumulated at their feet. Rodriguez took a round through his shoulder and dropped behind cover with a grunt of pain. That made 3 wounded now. The southern group was closing. Webb could see muzzle flashes through the trees, getting nearer with each burst. He was preparing to transmit again when the radio crackled with a voice he would remember for the rest of his life. A woman's voice, steady and clear, carrying an undercurrent of something that might have been resolve or might have been resignation. "Viper 6, Reaper 2. I copy your situation. Send coordinates for immediate CAS. I am inbound your position. ETA 11 minutes. Webb felt something release in his chest. "Reaper 2, coordinates follow." He rattled off the grid reference, the enemy positions, the location of his wounded. When he finished, he added one more transmission. "Reaper 2, be advised we are danger close. Friendlies are 50 meters from nearest hostile position. Confirm you are qualified for danger close fire mission." The response came without hesitation. "Viper 6, I am qualified. Mark your position with smoke on my call. Reaper 2 out." Webb lowered the radio and looked at Rivera. The young specialist was staring at him with something like hope breaking through the fear. "She is coming," Rivera said. Webb nodded and raised his rifle toward the tree line. "Now, we just have to stay alive until she gets here." Captain Maya Chan had made her decision before the transmission ended. The calculations ran through her mind with the automatic precision of a pilot who had spent thousands of hours learning to think in numbers. 11 minutes to the Karengal Valley. Fuel sufficient for 20 minutes of combat operations before Bingo forced her to disengage. Hydraulic pressure degraded, but holding within limits that would allow her to fight. Ammunition full. Weapons systems green. The math was simple. The consequences were not. She keyed her radio and transmitted the words that would end her career or save 12 lives, or possibly both. "Viper 6, Reaper 2. I copy your situation. Send coordinates for immediate CAS. I am inbound your position. ETA 11 minutes. The response from the ground came fast. A stream of coordinates and tactical data delivered by a voice that was fighting to stay calm. She copied the numbers onto her kneeboard, plotting enemy positions relative to the friendly location. Danger close. 50 meters. The kind of mission where a 2-degree error in her gun run would kill the men she was trying to save. She banked the A-10 hard to the southwest and pushed the throttles forward. The twin turbofan engines responded with a surge of power that pressed her back into the ejection seat. Airspeed climbing through 300 knots. Altitude descending through 12,000 feet. The brown landscape below began to resolve into individual features, ridgelines and valleys, and the dark green smears of vegetation that could hide 100 fighters. Her command frequency erupted before she had completed the turn. "Reaper 2, Warhorse Control." Major Hollins's voice had lost its condescension. Now it carried the sharp edge of authority being challenged. "You are ordered to cease current heading and return to base immediately. You do not have authorization for this engagement. Acknowledge." Chun looked at the radio panel. She could acknowledge the order, turn the aircraft around, and land at Bagram in 30 minutes. There would be no consequences. No code martial. No black mark on a record that was already stained by 4 months of being considered unfit for combat missions. She could follow the rules and let 12 Americans die in a valley she could reach in 11 minutes. Warhorse Control, Reaper 2 copies, she transmitted, proceeding to Viper 6 position for close air support. Reaper 2 out. She reached down and switched off the command frequency before Hollins could respond. The silence that followed felt like stepping off a cliff. There was no going back now. She had disobeyed a direct order from a superior officer in a combat zone. The evidence was recorded on multiple frequencies, time-stamped and logged by systems she could not erase. Whatever happened in the next 30 minutes, her career in the Air Force was probably over. The aircraft shuddered as she descended through 10,000 feet, and the air grew thicker. Her hydraulic warning light pulsed amber in her peripheral vision, a reminder that she was taking a damaged aircraft into a combat situation that would stress every system to its limits. She checked the pressure reading. Holding. Barely. Her mind went to the letter she had written 6 months ago and never sent. The one addressed to her parents in Sacramento that tried to explain why she had chosen this life. Why she spent her days strapped into an aircraft designed to fly low and slow over battlefields where people were trying to kill her. She had never found the right words. How do you explain to people who love you that some things matter more than coming home? She pulled out her kneeboard and found the blank card she kept tucked behind her mission data. Her hand was steady as she uncapped her pen. 3 words. That was all she could think to write. 3 words that would tell her parents everything they needed to know if the men at Dover Air Force Base delivered her remains in a flag-draped box. Tell them I tried. She stared at the words for a moment, then tucked the kneeboard back against her thigh and returned her focus to the mission. The Karangal Valley was visible now, a jagged scar in the mountains ahead. Smoke rose from a point near the valley floor, black and oily, marking the wreckage of what had probably been the extraction helicopter. Somewhere near that smoke, 12 Americans were fighting for their lives. Chun armed her weapons systems. The GU-8 cannon reported ready, 1,100 rounds of 30mm ammunition waiting to be delivered at a rate of 65 rounds per second. Her Maverick missiles showed green on the display. The A-10 was an ugly aircraft, slow by fighter standards, and utterly lacking in the glamour that attracted pilots to sleeker airframes. But it was built for exactly this moment. It was built to save soldiers on the ground when nothing else could reach them in time. She keyed the tactical frequency. Viper 6, Reaper 2. I am 3 minutes out. Confirm enemy positions and stand by to mark your location with smoke. The voice that answered belonged to a man who had accepted that he was going to die and was now processing the possibility that he might not. Reaper 2, Viper 6. Enemy positions are north, south, and east of our location. Heaviest concentration is in the eastern tree line, approximately 40 fighters. Southern group is maneuvering toward the high ground. We will mark with purple smoke on your call. Chin pushed the nose down and felt gravity shift as the aircraft accelerated toward the valley floor. The altimeter unwound through 5,000 feet for 1,000, 3,000. At this altitude, she could see individual trees, individual rocks, the shapes of men moving through the landscape below. Viper 6, Reaper 2. I have visual on the smoke. Marking Easter Tree Line for gun run. Keep your heads down. She lined up her approach, placed the targeting reticle over the tree line where muzzle flashes sparkled like malevolent fireflies, and felt her fingers settle against the trigger. One deep breath. Then she squeezed. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb had counted his remaining magazines twice. The number had not improved. For magazines per man, maybe 5 for the soldiers who had been conservative with their trigger discipline, against 40-plus fighters who were now close enough that he could hear them shouting commands to each other in Pashto. The mathematics of ammunition versus enemy combatants was a calculation he had learned to make early in his career, and right now the numbers spelled out a single word. Overrun. Rodriguez was applying a pressure bandage to his own shoulder with one hand, his rifle propped against the rock beside him. Kowalski had taken shrapnel to the leg, and could not move without assistance. The critical casualty was Sergeant Davis, who had caught a round through his abdomen during the initial ambush and was now lying in the center of their position with a morphine drip and a complexion the color of old chalk. He needed a surgeon within the hour, or he was not going to make it. Webb did not have an hour to give him. The Southern group had reached the ridgeline. Webb could see their silhouettes moving against the sky, working into positions that would give them plunging fire into his team's cover. When they opened up, the boulders that had kept his men alive would become a trap instead of a shelter. 5 minutes, maybe less. Rivera grabbed his arm and pointed toward the eastern sky. "Sergeant, I hear something." Webb listened. Under the crack of rifles and the shouts of advancing fighters, there was a new sound, a low rumble that grew into a distinctive whine. Turbofan engines. His heart surged and then immediately calculated the odds. Even if it was the A-10, even if she had made it in time, there was no guarantee she could change the outcome. Close air support in terrain like this was brutally difficult. One wrong pass, and she would kill his men instead of the enemy. The aircraft appeared over the eastern ridgeline like something out of a nightmare designed for the other side. It came in low, impossibly low, hugging the terrain in a way that seemed to violate the basic principles of aviation. The nose was pointed down at an angle that looked like a controlled crash. The wings rocked once as the pilot made a final adjustment, and then the sound of the Ju-8 cannon erased every other noise in the valley. Webb had heard the Avenger cannon before. Every soldier who had served in Afghanistan knew that sound, the deep tearing roar that pilots called the voice of God. But he had never heard it this close, never felt the pressure wave of 1,100 rounds per minute being delivered 50 meters from his position. The eastern tree line disintegrated. Trees snapped and fell. Bodies that had been shooting at him moments before simply ceased to exist, replaced by clouds of debris and the acrid smell of high-explosive incendiary rounds doing what they were designed to do. The A-10 roared overhead at 300 feet, close enough that Webb could see the pilot's helmet through the canopy. Then it was climbing away, banking hard to come around for another pass. The whole engagement had lasted maybe 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, the heaviest enemy position had been reduced to splinters and silence. "Holy God," Reyes whispered from somewhere to Webb's left. Did that just happen? Webb keyed his radio with fingers that were suddenly trembling. "Viper 6 to Reaper 2. Good effect on target. I say again, good effect on target. Enemy position destroyed." The response came back calm and professional, as if the pilot had just completed a routine training exercise instead of a danger-close gun run that had threaded the needle between his men and 40 armed fighters. "Viper 6, Reaper 2. I copy good effect. I count approximately 30 remaining combatants in 2 positions. Southern ridgeline and northern tree line. Stand by to mark your position with smoke for second pass." Webb turned to his weapons sergeant. "Garcia, purple smoke." Now, Garcia pulled the pin and tossed the smoke grenade into the open space between their position and the burning wreckage of the helicopter. Purple clouds billowed upward, marking the spot where 12 Americans were refusing to die. "Reaper 2, Viper 6. Smoke out." The A-10 had completed its turn and was coming back around, this time from the south. Webb watched it descend toward the ridgeline, where the flanking force had been preparing to deliver the killing blow. The cannon roared again, shorter this time, more precise. Rounds walked across the ridge in a line that began at the western edge and terminated at the exact point where the enemy fighters had been setting up their firing positions. Rock and soil erupted in a geyser of destruction. The silhouettes Webb had seen moments before were gone. 2 passes, 2 enemy positions eliminated. The pilot was not just competent. She was exceptional. The northern tree line was still active. Rounds continued to snap overhead from that direction, but the rate of fire had slackened. The fighters there had just watched half their force get erased in under 30 seconds. Webb could imagine their calculations changing, the aggressive confidence of an ambush turning into the desperate arithmetic of survival. "Reaper 2, Viper 6. Outstanding work. Northern position is still engaging. Can you make another pass?" There was a pause before the response came. And when it did, Webb caught something in the pilot's voice that had not been there before. A tightness that suggested things were not entirely nominal in that cockpit. Viper 6, Reaper 2. Affirm. I have the northern position. Be advised, I am showing some battle damage up here. Nothing critical yet. Making my third pass now. Keep marking with smoke. Webb watched the A-10 bank toward the northern tree line, smoke trailing from somewhere near the left wing. She was taking ground fire and pressing the attack anyway. She had been ordered to return to base with a damaged aircraft, and instead she was flying repeated gun runs through a valley full of people trying to kill her, for men she had never met. "Who the hell is that pilot?" Rivera asked. Webb shook his head. "I do not know, but if we get out of here alive, I'm going to find out." The cannon roared a third time, and the northern tree line erupted in fire and thunder. When the sound faded, the valley had gone quiet except for the crackling of flames and the distant whine of the A-10 climbing back toward the sky. Captain Maya Chun felt the impact before she heard it. A sharp jolt through the airframe, somewhere after the cockpit, followed by the master caution alarm screaming in her headset. She silenced the alarm and scanned her instrument panel with the methodical calm of a pilot who had trained for this moment 100 times in simulators but never expected to experience it for real. Left hydraulic system failure. The amber warning light that had been blinking for the past hour was now solid red. Pressure at 0. The system that controlled half of her flight surfaces had just died, victim of a round that had punched through her fuselage during the third gun run. She tested her controls and felt the difference immediately. The stick required more force to move. The aircraft responded sluggishly to inputs on the left side, compensating through the backup mechanical linkages that every A-10 pilot prayed they would never need to use. She was still flying. The Warthog had been designed by engineers who understood that close air support meant getting shot at, and they had built redundancy into every critical system. One hydraulic failure was survivable, but survivable was not the same as optimal, and she was about to take this damaged aircraft back into a valley full of people who had just watched her kill 30 of their friends. Reaper 2, Viper 6. The voice from the ground carried an urgency that had not diminished despite the devastation she had just delivered. "We have fighters regrouping in the western tree line. They're trying to flank us again. Can you engage?" Chun checked her ammunition counter. 400 rounds remaining out of 1,100. Enough for 2 more gun runs if she was conservative. Maybe 3 if she fired in shorter bursts. Her fuel gauge showed 14 minutes to bingo, the point at which she would have to break off and head for the nearest airfield or risk flaming out over hostile territory. Viper 6, Reaper 2. I copy western tree line. Coming around for another pass. She banked the aircraft and felt the asymmetry in her controls, the way the A-10 wanted to drift left without constant correction. Her right hand made adjustments automatically while her eyes searched the valley floor for the new threat. There, movement in the trees west of the smoke marker. Muzzle flashes winking through the foliage as the surviving fighters tried to reposition for another assault on the pin soldiers. Chin pushed the nose down and lined up her approach. At 1,500 feet, she could see individual figures scrambling between trees. At 1,000 feet, the tracers started reaching up toward her, green lines of light that arced past the canopy with a beauty that belied their lethality. She felt 2 more impacts, one on the right wing and one somewhere near the tail. The aircraft shuddered but kept flying. She squeezed the trigger and held it for 2 seconds. The GAU-8 roared, sending a stream of 30mm rounds into the tree line at a rate that turned individual trees into clouds of splinters. The muzzle flashes below her went silent. She pulled up hard and felt the damaged hydraulic system protest, the controls heavy and unresponsive for a terrifying moment before the backup system caught up with her inputs. Her engine instruments caught her attention as she climbed away from the valley floor. Right engine exhaust gas temperature was climbing toward the red line. She had taken damage to the intake during one of the passes, and the engine was now running hot as it tried to compensate for restricted airflow. Not critical yet, but the trend was moving in the wrong direction. Viper 6, Reaper 2. Good effect on western position. Be advised, I am showing battle damage and elevated engine temps. Estimate 5 more minutes on station maximum. The pause before the response told her everything she needed to know about the situation on the ground. Reaper 2, Viper 6. We copy your status. We have 3 wounded, including 1 critical. We cannot move them without suppression. Is there any way you can extend? Chen looked at her fuel gauge, her engine temperature, her hydraulic pressure. The mathematics of her situation were unforgiving. 5 minutes was optimistic. 3 minutes was realistic. After that, she would either be heading for an emergency landing or falling out of the sky. Viper 6, I will stay as long as I can, she transmitted. What is the status of QRF? Warhorse control cut into the frequency, a different voice than Holland's. Controlled and professional. Reaper 2, Warhorse actual. QRF is 12 minutes out. Apaches are inbound your position. Can you hold? 12 minutes. She had maybe 5 minutes of combat capability remaining. The gap between those numbers was the space where 12 Americans would live or die. Chun made her decision the same way she had made every decision in this valley, by refusing to accept the mathematics of defeat. Warhorse actual, Ripe 2. I will hold. She checked her remaining ordnance. 280 rounds in the cannon. 1 AGM-65 Maverick missile. The Maverick was designed for hardened targets, vehicles, and bunkers, but it would work just as well against a concentration of infantry if she could find the right moment to use it. Moving on her right drew her attention. A technical vehicle, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, was emerging from a draw to the north. The fighters below had called for reinforcements, and this was what had answered. The machine gun was already tracking toward the smoke marker where the American soldiers were trapped. Chen did not hesitate. She slaved the Maverick to her targeting system, placed the crosshairs on the technical, and pressed the release. The missile dropped from her wing and ignited, streaking toward the vehicle with a trail of white smoke. The explosion when it hit was larger than she expected, the truck's ammunition cooking off in a secondary blast that sent debris spinning through the air. Viper 6, Reaper 2. Technical destroyed. I am Winchester on missiles. Guns only from here. The response from the ground came with something that might have been all. Reaper 2, we saw it. Outstanding shot. We are attempting to move our wounded now. Can you provide suppression on the northern sector? Chen looked at her ammunition counter. 280 rounds. Her engine temperature was still climbing. Her hydraulic system was running on backup. And somewhere below her, men were carrying their wounded friends through a valley full of enemies because they believed she would keep them alive long enough to reach safety. She pointed the nose of her battered aircraft toward the northern sector and began her descent. Copy, Viper 6. Suppression coming now. Major Derek Hollins stood in the operations center at Bagram Airfield and watched his career unravel on a bank of monitors. The tactical display showed Reaper 2's position in the Karangal Valley, the aircraft's transponder blinking steadily as it executed gun runs that he had explicitly ordered Captain Chen not to perform. Audio feeds from multiple frequencies played through the overhead speakers, a chaos of ground troops calling targets and a pilot responding with the calm efficiency of someone who had forgotten that orders existed. She had switched off his frequency. The realization had taken him several minutes to process. A captain, a female captain who had spent 4 months flying escort missions because he had deemed her unfit for combat operations, had acknowledged his direct order and then simply stopped listening. The logs would show everything. His order, her acknowledgement, her subsequent actions. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Chun had committed an act of insubordination that would end her career the moment she landed. If she landed, Hollins watched the data feeds showing her aircraft status. Left hydraulic system offline. Right engine running hot. Battle damage indicators across multiple sensors. She was flying a crippled aircraft into repeated gun runs at danger-close range, and she was doing it with a precision that made his stomach tighten. The gun camera footage showed tree leans evaporating under her cannon fire. The ground team's transmissions described enemy positions being eliminated with surgical accuracy. She was good. The thought arrived unwelcome and refused to leave. She was very good, and he had spent 4 months making sure no one would ever know it. Major Hollins. The voice came from behind him, and he recognized it before he turned. Colonel Patricia Reeves, wing commander, had entered the operations center without announcement. Her expression carried the particular neutrality that superior officers adopted when they were about to ask questions they already knew the answers to. I understand we have an aircraft engaged in the Karengal Valley without authorization. Hollins straightened. Yes, ma'am. Captain Chun disobeyed a direct order to return to base. I have documented her insubordination and will be filing charges upon her return. Reeves moved past him to study the tactical display. The markers showing enemy positions had been reduced by half since the engagement began. The friendly position was holding. The casualty count had not increased. Walk me through the sequence, Major. A Special Forces team calls for emergency air support. What assets did we dispatch? Hollins felt the trap closing, but could not see a way around it. Ma'am, QRF was 40 minutes out. The nearest dedicated CAS asset was tasked to another mission. We advised Viper 6 to consolidate position and await extraction. And Captain Chun? She was returning to base with a hydraulic warning. I ordered her to continue RTB for maintenance inspection. Reeves turned to face him. Her eyes held the flat assessment of a commander who had sent pilots into combat for 20 years and knew exactly what that hydraulic warning meant. A warning light, not a failure. A fluctuation in pressure that any qualified A-10 pilot would monitor, but not aboard a mission over. Hollins said nothing. There was nothing to say that would improve his position. The wing commander turned back to the displays. On the audio feed, Chen's voice reported destroying a technical vehicle with her last missile. The ground team confirmed they were moving wounded. The aircraft status showed her ammunition depleting with each pass. Major, Colonel Reeves said quietly, if Captain Chun had followed your order, we would be notifying 12 families tonight. I want you to understand that clearly. Ma'am, she disobeyed a direct order in a combat zone. Regardless of the outcome, that cannot be overlooked. Reeves nodded slowly. You are correct. It cannot be overlooked. She paused, and when she continued, her voice had hardened. Neither can your decision to order the only available asset to RTB while American soldiers were dying. Neither can 4 months of mission assignments that systematically excluded qualified female pilots from combat operations. Did you think no one was tracking those patterns, Major? Hollins felt the blood drain from his face. Ma'am, I have always assigned pilots based on my assessment of their capabilities and readiness. Your assessment. Reeves pulled up a personnel file on one of the terminals. Captain Chun, 2,000 hours in the A-10. Instructor qualified. Top marks in every combat simulation. For commendations from her previous command. And you assigned her exclusively to escort and patrol missions for 4 months because of your assessment. The operations center had gone quiet around them. Technicians and junior officers were finding reasons to focus intently on their screens. Hollins could feel their attention like heat on the back of his neck. I made judgments based on available information, he managed. You made judgments based on bias, Colonel Reeves replied. And right now, that pilot you deemed unfit for combat is the only thing standing between 12 Americans and a body count. So here is what is going to happen, Major. You're going to direct every available asset to support her position. You're going to ensure that QRF arrives as fast as physics allows. And when this is over, you and I are going to have a very detailed conversation about your future in my command. She turned to the communications officer. Give me a direct line to Reaper 2. I want that pilot to know she has support coming. Hollins watched the colonel take control of his operation and understood that his career had just entered a terminal descent. The irony was not lost on him. He had spent 4 months trying to keep Maya Chun grounded, and now her flight was going to ground him instead. On the monitor, her aircraft banked toward another gun run, trailing smoke from battle damage that should have sent any reasonable pilot home. She was still fighting. She was still saving lives. And he had tried to stop her. The thought settled into his chest like a stone. The fire warning light illuminated at the same moment Captain Maya Chun felt the right engine die. 1 second, she had 2 turbofans pushing her through the Afghan sky, and the next she had one engine and a cockpit full of alarms telling her that her aircraft was burning. She moved through the emergency procedures with the automatic precision of muscle memory, her hands finding switches and handles without conscious thought. Fire suppression activated. Right engine shut down. Fuel feed isolated. The fire warning extinguished, but the engine did not restart. She was now flying a 23,000-pound aircraft on a single engine with degraded hydraulics, 200 feet above a valley full of people who wanted her dead. The A-10 had been designed for exactly this scenario. Fairchild Republic engineers had built redundancy into every system because they understood that close air support meant absorbing damage that would destroy lesser aircraft. One engine was enough. The flight manual said so. Her instructors had said so. She had told her own students so back when she was teaching young pilots how to survive the unsurvivable. None of those lessons had included taking ground fire while doing it. The aircraft felt different now, heavier on the controls, slower to respond, pulling slightly to the right where the dead engine created asymmetric drag. She compensated automatically, trimming the aircraft to fly straight, but every adjustment cost her airspeed and altitude. The mathematics of single-engine flight were unforgiving. More fuel consumption, less power, reduced climb capability. Her 8 minutes of combat time had just become 5. Reaper 2, Viper 6. The voice from the ground carried a new note, something that might have been hope breaking through exhaustion. We are moving wounded toward the extraction point. Northern sector has fighters repositioning. Can you suppress? Chun checked her ammunition counter. 160 rounds. 2 bursts, maybe 3 if she was precise. After that, she would be flying an unarmed aircraft through hostile airspace with one engine and half her hydraulic system gone. Viper 6, Reaper 2. I copy your movement. Be advised, I have lost my right engine. I am single engine and running low on ammunition. I can make one more gun run. Make it count. She did not wait for a response. The northern sector was visible on her left, a cluster of rocks and scrub brush where muzzle flashes marked the position of fighters trying to intercept the American soldiers moving below. She banked the aircraft, felt the sluggish response of damaged systems, and pointed her nose at the enemy position. The descent was rougher than before. The single engine strained to maintain airspeed while she dropped altitude, and the controls required constant correction to keep the aircraft on target. Tracers reached up toward her from multiple positions, green lines crossing through the space where her aircraft had been moments before. She felt an impact somewhere on the fuselage, heard the metallic shriek of rounds punching through aluminum, and kept descending. At 500 feet, she opened fire. The Gu-8 roared for 1.5 seconds, sending 90 rounds into the enemy position. Rock and earth erupted in a cloud of debris. The muzzle flashes went silent. She pulled up hard and felt the aircraft shudder in protest. The single engine was at maximum power, exhaust temperature deep in the yellow zone, and she was asking to climb while carrying battle damage that would have grounded any other airframe. For a long moment, she was not sure the Warthog would respond. The nose came up slowly, painfully, the altimeter unwinding through 300 feet before it finally stabilized and began to climb. Her ammunition counter showed 70 rounds. 1 burst. Maybe. A new voice cut through the radio traffic, authoritative and clear. Reaper 2. This is Warhorse Actual. Colonel Patricia Reeves. QRF is 8 minutes out. Apaches will be on station in 6. What is your status? Shin took a breath before responding. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline and fatigue combining into a tremor she could not control. The cockpit smelled like sweat and smoke and the particular ozone tang of electrical systems running hot. Warhorse Actual, Reaper 2. I am single engine, degraded hydraulics, and down to 70 rounds. I could provide one more gun pass if needed. Fuel state is 4 minutes to bingo. The pause before the response lasted 2 seconds. When Reeves spoke again, her voice carried something that Chun had not heard from a superior officer in 4 months. Respect. Reaper 2, you have done extraordinary work today. No one would fault you for breaking off and heading for the nearest field. Can you make it to FOB Wilderness on single engine? Chin calculated the distance, fuel consumption, the degraded performance of her damaged aircraft. FOB Wilderness was 12 miles east. On single engine, she could make it with maybe 30 seconds of fuel remaining. If everything went perfectly, if she did not encounter headwinds or additional enemy fire or any of the 100 things that could go wrong between here and there. Warhorse Actual, I can make Wilderness. But Viper 6 still has wounded moving in the open. I will hold until QRF arrives or until I am Winchester. She looked down at the valley floor, at the smoke marker and the tiny figures moving through the rocks below. 2 soldiers carrying a third between them. Others providing security, rifles pointed outward. They were exposed, vulnerable, trusting that she would keep the sky clear long enough for them to reach safety. Another voice came through, rough with exhaustion and gunfire. Reaper 2, Viper 6. We copy your status. You have given us everything we could ask for. Get yourself home safe. Chun smiled despite herself. It was the smile of someone who had already made their decision and found it easier than expected. Viper 6, Reaper 2. I'm not leaving until you are clear or until Apaches are overhead. That is not a suggestion. She banked the aircraft into a slow orbit over the American position, conserving fuel and altitude while she watched for any sign of renewed enemy activity. Her single engine hummed steadily beneath her. The fuel gauge counted down toward 0. Somewhere to the east, helicopters were racing toward this valley with guns and rockets and the promise of overwhelming force. 6 minutes. She just had to hold for 6 more minutes. The valley below had gone quiet, but she knew better than to trust the silence. The surviving fighters were still out there, watching, waiting for their moment. She would be watching too. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb was 50 meters from the extraction point when the gunfire resumed. It came from the northwest, a direction that had been quiet throughout the engagement, and it came with the intensity of fighters who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Fresh reinforcements, maybe 20 of them, pouring fire into the open ground his team had to cross to reach the rally point. Down, he shouted, and his men dropped behind whatever cover they could find. Garcia and Thompson were carrying Davis between them, the critically wounded sergeant barely conscious, and they went to ground hard behind a boulder that was too small to protect all 3 of them. Rounds snapped overhead, kicking up dirt and rock fragments. The extraction point was right there, 50 meters of open terrain that might as well have been 50 miles. Webb keyed his radio. Reaper 2, Viper 6. We have new contacts northwest of our position. We are pinned down. Cannot make extraction point. He looked up at the sky where the A-10 was circling, trailing smoke from its dead engine. He knew what he was asking. The pilot had already given everything, had already pushed that damaged aircraft beyond any reasonable limit. Her ammunition was nearly gone, her fuel was critical, and now he was asking her to make another run against fresh fighters who would be ready for her. The response came without hesitation. Viper 6, Reaper 2. I see them. Coming around for gun run. This is my last pass. Make it count. Webb watched the aircraft bank out of its orbit and descend toward the valley floor. It moved differently now, slower and heavier, the single engine straining to maintain airspeed as the pilot lined up her approach. She was coming in lower than before, below 200 feet, putting herself directly in the path of every rifle and machine gun in the valley to give herself the best possible angle on the enemy position. The Taliban fighters saw her coming. Tracers erupted from the northwest, streams of green light reaching up toward the descending aircraft. Webb saw rounds strike the fuselage, saw pieces of metal separate from the wings, and for a terrible moment, he was certain the A-10 was going to come apart in the sky above him. Then the cannon fired. The sound was shorter than before, a brief tearing roar that lasted less than a second. 70 rounds, maybe less, delivered into the enemy position with the precision of a pilot who knew this was her final weapon. The northwestern treeline erupted in a spray of debris and falling bodies. The incoming fire slackened as fighters dove for cover or simply ceased to exist. The A-10 roared overhead at 150 feet, close enough that Webb could see the battle damage scarring its fuselage, the smoke streaming from the dead right engine. The jagged holes punched through the tail section. It climbed away slowly, painfully, the single engine screaming at maximum power. Reaper 2, Viper 6. Good effect. Outstanding effect. We're moving now. Webb was on his feet before the last word left his mouth. Move, he shouted. Everyone move now. His team surged forward, carrying their wounded, sprinting across the open ground toward the extraction point. Behind them, the northwestern position had gone quiet. Ahead, the rally point offered solid cover and a defensible perimeter. 50 meters became 40, then 30, then 20. They were going to make it. A burst of fire erupted from somewhere to the east. One of his men went down, clutching his leg. Webb spun, identified the shooter, and emptied his magazine into the rocks where the muzzle flash had originated. More fire came from the northwest, survivors of the gun run regrouping faster than expected. His team was caught in the open with 10 meters to go. Then the A-10 came back. Webb heard it before he saw it, the whine of a single engine pushing a damaged airframe through a combat descent. He looked up and saw the Warthog dropping toward the valley floor, nose pointed at the enemy positions, coming in for another pass. But there was no cannon fire. The gun had run dry. The aircraft was empty. She came in anyway. The A-10 screamed over the enemy position at 100 feet, engine howling, drawing every rifle and machine gun in the valley toward itself. Tracers that had been aimed at Webb's team swung skyward, chasing the aircraft as it roared through the gauntlet of fire. The pilot was using herself as bait, as a distraction, giving his men the seconds they needed to reach cover. Webb grabbed the wounded soldier and dragged him the final 10 meters into the rally point. His team piled in behind him, laying down suppressive fire while the last men crossed the open ground. He looked up and saw the A-10 climbing away, smoke pouring from its remaining engine now, the aircraft visibly struggling to gain altitude. She had drawn fire with an empty aircraft. She had put herself between his team and the enemy with nothing but engines and wings and the kind of courage that Webb had seen only a handful of times in 15 years of combat. Reaper 2, Viper 6. He had to stop and clear his throat before he could continue. We are at the rally point. All personnel accounted for. You saved us. The response came back thin, strained, the voice of a pilot fighting a dying aircraft. Viper 6, Reaper 2. I copy. I am bingo fuel and single engine. Proceeding to FOB Wilderness for emergency landing. It has been an honor flying for you today. Webb watched the A-10 turn east, trailing smoke against the afternoon sky. In the distance, he could hear the distinctive sound of Apache helicopters approaching, rotors beating the air as the cavalry finally arrived. His team was safe. His wounded would survive. 12 Americans who should have died in this valley were going to go home to their families. Because one pilot had refused to quit. Reyes appeared at his shoulder, blood still drying on his face from the gash above his eye. Sergeant, who was that? Webb shook his head. I do not know her name, but I want to find out. He watched the A-10 disappear over the eastern ridge, smoke marking its path like a signature written across the sky. The Apaches swept overhead, miniguns already spinning as they hunted for surviving enemy fighters. The extraction helicopters were 2 minutes out. The battle for the Karengal Valley was over. But Webb knew that what he had witnessed today was something he would carry for the rest of his life. A pilot who had been ordered to go home had chosen to stay and fight. A pilot flying a crippled aircraft had made pass after pass until her guns were empty and then made one more pass with nothing left to give except herself. He looked down at the 3 words he had scratched into the dirt during the firefight. A message he had intended for his daughter if he did not make it home. Tell her I loved her. He scuffed the words out with his boot. He would tell her himself. Because of that pilot, he would tell her himself. Captain Maya Chan watched her fuel gauge drop below the red line and understood that mathematics had finally caught up with her. The needle was touching empty, bouncing against the peg with each vibration of the airframe, and the 12 miles between her position and FOB Wilderness might as well have been 1,200. Her single engine was running hot, coughing occasionally as the fuel flow became inconsistent, and the Afghan mountains below offered nothing but rocks and ridgelines and the certainty of death if that engine quit before she reached the runway. She had made her choice back in the valley. She had known the cost when she turned for that final decoy pass. Now she was paying in altitude and airspeed and the steady countdown of a fuel gauge that had nothing left to give. Warhorse Actual, Reaper 2. She kept her voice steady through force of will alone, declaring emergency. Single engine, fuel critical, battle damage extensive. I'm not going to make Bagram. Requesting vectors to nearest available runway. The response came immediately. Colonel Reeves's voice cutting through the static with crisp authority. Reaper 2, Warhorse Actual. FOB Wilderness is 11 miles on your current heading. They're clearing the runway and rolling emergency equipment. Can you make 11 miles? Chun looked at her instruments. Fuel flow was erratic. Engine temperature was climbing again. The hydraulic backup system that had kept her alive through the engagement was showing signs of fatigue, the controls growing heavier with each passing minute. 11 miles. At her current airspeed, that was approximately 4 minutes of flight time. She had maybe 3 minutes of fuel remaining. Maybe less. Warhorse Actual, I will make it or I will not. There is nothing in between. She adjusted her trim to maximize glide efficiency and began calculating the impossible. If the engine quit at altitude, she could glide approximately 2 miles per 1,000 feet. She was currently at 4,000 feet. 8 miles of glide range if she lost power right now. The FOB was 11 miles away. The math did not work. The math had not worked since she turned back for that final pass. But the A-10 had never cared much for math. Behind her, the Karangal Valley was alive with the sound of Apache gunships finishing what she had started. She could hear the radio traffic, the attack helicopters calling targets, and engaging with Hellfires and chain guns, methodically eliminating the remaining enemy positions. The soldiers she had protected were being loaded onto extraction helicopters. The wounded were receiving medical care. 12 Americans who should have died were going home. The engine coughed again, harder this time, and Chun felt the aircraft shudder. Fuel starvation. The tanks were running dry, and the engine was starting to notice. She had seconds, maybe a minute, before the turbofan ingested the last drops of JP-8 and wound down into silence. 7 miles to the FOB. 3,000 feet of altitude. The numbers were getting closer, but they still did not add up. In the Karangal Valley, Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb climbed aboard the extraction helicopter with his team. The wounded were already secured. Davis on a stretcher with a medic working to stabilize him for the flight to the surgical hospital at Bagram. The Black Hawk lifted off in a storm of dust and rotor wash, climbing away from the valley that had nearly become their grave. Webb found a seat near the door gunner and looked east, searching for the trail of smoke that would mark the A-10's path. He found it, a dark smear against the blue sky, moving slowly toward the mountains that separated the valley from the forward operating base beyond. The crew chief leaned close to be heard over the rotor noise. "Is your angel up there?" Webb nodded. She came when no one else would. The crew chief shook his head with something like wonder. "We heard the traffic. Command ordered her back to base, and she just kept flying. Burned through all her ordnance, took a dozen hits, lost an engine, and then came back around with empty guns to draw fire off your position. The whole TOC was listening. Never heard anything like it." Webb watched the smoke trail descend toward the eastern mountains. She was losing altitude. The aircraft that had saved his team was dying in the sky, and there was nothing he could do but watch. "What was her name?" he asked. "Chun. Captain Maya Chun." The crew chief paused. "They say she was on escort duty for 4 months. Some major had her flying circles around supply convoys because he did not think she could handle combat." Webb said nothing. He watched the A-10 disappear behind a ridgeline and felt something twist in his chest. 11 miles became 8. Chin's engine was sputtering continuously now, the fuel flow barely enough to maintain combustion. She was descending faster than she wanted, trading altitude for distance, trying to stretch every foot of elevation into forward progress. The mountains ahead were getting closer, but so was the ground below. "Reaper 2, FOB Wilderness Tower. We have you on radar. Runway is clear." Emergency cruise standing by. You're 5 miles out. Chen did not have the fuel for 5 miles. She knew it with the certainty of a pilot who had spent her career learning to read the signs of an aircraft in extremis. The engine was going to quit before she reached the field. The only question was whether she would have enough altitude to glide the rest of the way. The engine died at 4 miles out. The sudden silence was deafening. One moment, the turbofan was coughing and struggling, and the next there was nothing but the whisper of wind over the canopy and the distant creak of a damaged airframe settling into unpowered flight. Chen's hands moved automatically, trimming for best glide speed, configuring the aircraft for the approach she had practiced 100 times in simulators but never expected to fly for real. Wilderness Tower, Reaper 2. Engine flameout. I am gliding. For miles out, 2,500 feet. She did the math one more time. For miles, 2,500 feet. Best glide ratio of the A-10 was approximately 8-1. That gave her roughly 3.8 miles of glide range. She was going to come up short by 200 meters. Close enough to try. The FOB appeared ahead of her, a brown rectangle carved into the Afghan landscape with a dirt runway stretching east to west. She could see the emergency vehicles, red lights flashing, positioned along the runway edge. They were waiting for her. They were expecting her to make it. Chen intended to prove them right. The silence of unpowered flight had a particular quality that Captain Maya-chan had never fully appreciated until now. Without the constant vibration of the turbofan, without the background hum of systems running at full power, she could hear everything. The creak of the airframe as it settled into the glide. The whistle of wind finding gaps in the battle-damaged fuselage. The sound of her own breathing, steady and controlled. The breath of a pilot who refused to panic even as the ground rose up to meet her. 2,000 feet. 3.5 miles to the runway. The math had not improved. She configured the aircraft for maximum glide efficiency, hands moving through procedures she had memorized years ago. Gear up to reduce drag. Flaps neutral. Speed brakes retracted. Every adjustment bought her a few more feet of forward progress, a few more seconds before gravity claimed its due. Wilderness Tower, Reaper 2. 2 miles out, 1,500 feet. I am going to be short of the runway. Recommend emergency cruise position at the threshold. The tower controller's voice came back with force calm. Reaper 2, we copy. Crews are repositioning. Wind is calm. Runway is clear. You are cleared for emergency landing any available surface. Any available surface. That was tower speak for we know you are not going to make the runway, but we are hoping you find something flat before you hit the ground. Chen looked at the terrain between her aircraft and the FOB. Brown dirt, scattered rocks, a dry stream bed that cut across her approach path. Nothing remotely suitable for landing a 23,000-pound aircraft at 140 knots. The runway was the only option, and the runway was 200 meters beyond her glide range. Unless she found more altitude, unless she found a way to stretch the impossible into the merely improbable. She spotted it at 1,200 feet. A thermal rising off a dark rock formation to her left, the kind of invisible elevator that glider pilots use to stay aloft for hours. It was weak, barely a ripple in the air, but it was there. She banked toward it, felt the aircraft shudder as it caught the edge of the rising column, and watched her variometer tick upward. She was climbing. Not much, maybe 50 feet per minute, but climbing. The thermal carried her for 30 seconds before it dissipated. 30 seconds of borrowed altitude. 200 feet she had not earned through fuel or engine power. It was not enough to make the runway, but it was enough to change the math. 1 mile out. 1,000 feet. The runway threshold was visible now, a painted line on brown dirt that marked the difference between controlled landing and uncontrolled crash. She was going to clear the threshold. Barely. The landing gear was her next problem. The left strut had taken damage during the engagement, and she had no way of knowing if it would hold under the stress of touchdown. She could land gear up, belly down on the dirt runway, and accept the damage to the airframe. Or she could lower the gear and hope that the strut held long enough to bring the aircraft to a stop. She chose to lower the gear. The hydraulic system groaned as it pushed the wheels down against damaged actuators. 3 green lights appeared on her panel. Gear down and locked. The left strut was holding, at least for now, 500 feet, half a mile. The runway filled her windscreen, brown and flat and beautiful. Emergency vehicles lined the edges, red lights flashing. Firefighters in silver suits stood ready with hoses charged. They were waiting for her. They expected her to crash. Chen intended to disappoint them. She crossed the threshold at 130 knots, 10 feet above the ground, the damaged aircraft floating on ground effect as it bled off the last of its airspeed. The main wheels touched first, a solid thump that sent vibrations through the cockpit. The nose came down a moment later. Then the left strut collapsed. The aircraft lurched violently to the left as the damaged landing gear gave way. The left wing dropped, caught the dirt, and began to drag. Chun felt the A-10 slewing sideways, the right main gear still rolling while the left side carved a furrow through the runway surface. Metal screamed against rock and dirt. Sparks flew past the canopy. The aircraft was spinning now, rotating around its damaged wing, scrubbing off speed through friction and violence. She held the controls neutral and let the physics play out. There was nothing else to do. The aircraft would stop or it would not. She would survive or she would not. The decision had been made the moment she turned back for that final pass over the valley. The A-10 ground to a halt 50 feet from the end of the runway, canted at an angle with its left wing buried in the dirt and its canopy pointed toward the sky. Foam sprayed across the fuselage as crash crews moved in. The sound of sirens mixed with the tick of cooling metal and the distant shout of rescue personnel. Chen sat in the cockpit and listened to herself breathe. Her hands were shaking. Her flight suit was soaked through with sweat. The instrument panel in front of her was dark, every system dead, the aircraft reduced to 23,000 pounds of aluminum and titanium that would never fly again. But she was alive. And somewhere behind her, 12 Americans were alive because she had made a choice in a moment when the easy path led away from them. She reached down and pulled out her kneeboard. The 3 words she had written were still there, smudged with sweat and barely legible. Tell them I tried. Chen pulled out her pen and drew a single line through the words. She had not tried. She had done it. The message was no longer necessary. A rescue technician appeared at the side of the cockpit, reaching up to help her with the canopy release. Ma'am, are you injured? Can you move? Chen looked at him and felt a smile spread across her face. The smile of someone who had flown through fire and come out the other side. I can move, she said. Help me out of here. She climbed down from the cockpit and stood on Afghan soil beside the wreckage of her aircraft. The A-10 would never fly again. The fuselage was scorched and punctured. The left wing was crumpled. The engines were silent and cold. But it had done its job. It had carried her into the valley and brought her out again. It had saved 12 lives and delivered her safely to the ground. She placed her hand on the battered fuselage and whispered 2 words. Thank you. Then she turned and walked toward the medics waiting to check her over, leaving the aircraft behind. The war would continue. Other pilots would fly other missions. But this day, this fight belonged to her and to the warthog that had refused to die. The flight recorder data told a story that Colonel Patricia Rees had to watch 3 times before she fully believed it. She sat in her office at Bagram Airfield with a Pentagon oversight team connected via secure video link, and together they watched Captain Maya Chun fly into hell and bring 12 Americans out alive. The gun camera footage was extraordinary. 7 attack runs at danger close range, each one precisely calibrated to destroy enemy positions without endangering the friendly forces below. The targeting data showed tolerances measured in meters, the kind of accuracy that separated exceptional pilots from adequate ones. Chun had threaded the needle again and again, never once putting her ordnance where it could harm the soldiers she was protecting. But it was the final pass that silenced the room. The footage showed Chen's aircraft descending toward the valley floor with empty guns, no ordnance remaining, flying directly into enemy fire with nothing but her engines and her courage. The audio captured her voice, calm and steady, telling Viper 6 that she was coming around to provide suppression. The telemetry showed her airspeed, her altitude, the streams of tracer fire that reached up to meet her. She had used herself as bait, drawing enemy attention away from the extraction so the wounded could reach safety. The Pentagon representative, a one-star general named Morrison, spoke first. "Colonel Reeves, I have been reviewing combat footage for 22 years. This is one of the finest displays of close air support I have ever seen. Why was this pilot assigned to escort duty?" Reeves had prepared for this question. The answer sat in a folder on her desk, documented in emails and mission logs, and the testimony of 3 other female pilots who had come forward in the 48 hours since Chen's flight. She opened the folder and began to explain. Major Derek Hollins served as operations officer for the 355th Fighter Wing for 18 months. During that time, he systematically assigned female pilots to low-risk missions regardless of their qualifications or experience. Captain Chun was the most egregious example, but she was not the only one. Captain Jennifer Walsh, Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo, and Captain Diana Ruiz all reported similar patterns. Escort missions, patrol duties, administrative flights. Never combat assignments, despite being fully qualified. General Morrison leaned forward on the video screen. Was there documentation of this pattern? Reeves nodded. We recovered an email from Major Hollins to a colleague at another command. The exact quote was, "Women do not have the constitution for close air support." He wrote that 6 months ago, 3 weeks before Captain Chun arrived at his command. The silence that followed carried the weight of careers ending and policies changing. "Where is Major Hollins now?" the general asked. Reeves gestured toward the door. "Waiting in the anteroom, sir. I relieved him of duty immediately after Captain Chen's landing. He is confined to quarters pending formal charges." Morrison nodded slowly. "Bring him in." Hollins entered the office with the posture of a man who knew his world was collapsing but had not yet accepted it. His uniform was pressed, his bearing military, but something behind his eyes had gone hollow. He saluted the video screen and stood at attention while General Morrison studied him through the camera. "Major Hollins," the general began, "I have reviewed the flight recorder data from yesterday's engagement. I have read the testimony from 4 female pilots under your command. I have seen your email regarding women in combat aviation. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Hollins swallowed. "Sir, I made operational decisions based on my professional judgment. I believed I was acting in the best interest of mission success and pilot safety." "Pilot safety." Morrison repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air. "Major, you ordered Captain Chun to return to base while American soldiers were dying. If she had followed that order, 12 men would be dead right now. Is that your definition of pilot safety?" "Sir, she had a hydraulic warning. Regulations require aircraft with system warnings to return for maintenance inspection. She had a fluctuation," Reeves interjected. "Not a failure. A fluctuation that any qualified pilot would monitor and continue mission. You used a minor warning light as an excuse to pull her out of a combat situation because you did not believe a woman should be flying combat missions. That is not professional judgment, Major. That is discrimination." Hollins said nothing. There was nothing to say. The evidence was documented, time-stamped, irrefutable. General Morrison straightened in his chair. "Major Derek Hollins, you are hereby relieved of all duties pending court-martial proceedings. You will face charges of conduct unbecoming an officer, discrimination in violation of Department of Defense equal opportunity policies, and dereliction of duty resulting in endangerment of military personnel. Do you understand these charges?" "Yes, sir." "You are dismissed." Hollins saluted, turned, and walked out of the office. He did not look back. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything he had built over 20 years of service. Reeves turned back to the video screen. "Sir, there's one more matter. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, the team leader of the ODA unit that Captain Chin saved, has submitted a formal recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross. His statement describes her actions in detail, including the final pass with empty guns. His exact words were, "She gave everything she had, and then gave more." His entire team has signed the recommendation. General Morrison nodded. I will personally shepherd that recommendation through the awards board. Captain Chun will receive the recognition she deserves. And Colonel Reeves, I want a full review of combat mission assignments across all commands. If Hollins was doing this, others might be as well. We're going to find them and we're going to fix this. Yes, sir. The video connection ended. Reeves sat alone in her office, looking at the folder full of evidence that documented one man's bias and one woman's courage. The investigation would continue. More testimony would be gathered. Policies would change and procedures would be updated. But the core truth was simple. A-10 had been told she was not good enough, and she had answered with the kind of flying that would be studied in war colleges for decades. Derek Hollins had tried to ground her, and instead she had flown herself into legend. Reeve closed the folder and allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes justice arrived on the wings of a warthog. The ceremony took place on a Tuesday morning at Bagram Airfield, under a sky so blue it seemed painted. Captain A-10 stood at attention in her dress uniform, while a two-star general read the citation aloud to an audience of pilots, ground crews, and the 12 soldiers she had saved in the Karangal Valley. The words described her actions in the formal language of military commendation, but they could not capture what it had felt like to fly a dying aircraft through enemy fire with nothing left but will and wings. For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, the general read. Captain Chin demonstrated exceptional airmanship and complete disregard for her own safety while providing close air support to ground forces under attack. Despite battle damage, hydraulic failure, and engine loss, she continued to engage enemy positions until her ammunition was exhausted, then made an additional pass drawing enemy fire to allow friendly forces to reach safety. Her actions directly saved the lives of 12 American service members and reflect great credit upon herself and the United States Air Force. The Distinguished Flying Cross was pinned to her chest with practice ceremony. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the hangar. Chin kept her eyes forward and thought about the men who stood in the front row, the ones who knew what that medal really meant. After the ceremony, Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb approached her. He walked with a slight limp from a wound that had not fully healed, and his eyes carried the particular weight of a man who had looked death in the face and been pulled back from the edge. He stopped in front of her and extended his hand. Captain Chun, I never got to thank you properly. She took his hand. You do not need to thank me, Sergeant. I was doing my job. Webb shook his head. No, ma'am. Your job that day was to fly back to base. You chose to do something else. He paused, and when he continued, his voice had thickened. I have a daughter. She is 11 years old, and she wants to be a pilot. I'm going to tell her about you. I'm going to tell her that when everyone said you could not do something, you did it anyway. Chun felt something shift in her chest, a knot loosening that she had not known was there. Thank you, she said. That means more than the medal. Webb nodded and stepped back. His team was waiting for him, 11 men who had walked out of the Karangal Valley because one pilot refused to quit. They raised their hands in salute as Chun walked past, a gesture of respect that no regulation required and no order could compel. That afternoon, she visited the maintenance hangar where her aircraft had been towed after the crash landing. The A-10 sat in the center of the bay like a wounded warrior, its left wing crumpled, its fuselage scorched and punctured by dozens of rounds. It would never fly again. The damage was too extensive, the repairs too costly for an airframe that had already exceeded its service life. But someone had added something to the battered fuselage. Below the cockpit, painted in neat rows, were 12 small silhouettes. Human figures, each one representing a life saved. The maintenance crew had given her aircraft the recognition it deserved. Chin placed her hand on the titanium bathtub that had protected her through 7 attack runs and a crash landing. The metal was cold under her fingers, inert and lifeless, but she could still feel the ghost of the vibration that had carried her through the most important flight of her life. You did good, she whispered. You brought them home. 6 months later, Captain A-10 stood in front of a classroom at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. She had requested the transfer herself, turning down a promotion to major and a staff position at the Pentagon. She had spent her career teaching pilots to fly, and the Karangal Valley had reminded her why that work mattered. Her first class included 16 students. 4 of them were women. They sat in rows of desks, young faces filled with the nervous anticipation of pilots who had not yet learned what they were capable of. They had heard the stories about their instructor, the whispered accounts of what she had done in Afghanistan. They looked at her with something between awe and uncertainty, wondering if they could ever measure up to the legend standing at the front of the room. Chun reached in her flight bag and pulled out a battered kneeboard. The cardstock was stained with sweat and creased for being pressed against her thigh through hours of combat flight. She held it up so they could see the 3 words written on the surface and the single line that crossed through them. "I wrote this when I thought I was not coming home," she said. "Tell them I tried. I wanted my parents to know that I gave everything I had." She paused, letting the words settle over the silent room. "I crossed it out when I landed, not because trying was not enough, but because I realized something in that valley. Trying is what you do when you think you might fail. What I did was something different. I decided that those men were going to live, and then I made it true. The trying stopped the moment I made that decision." She set the kneeboard down on the desk in front of her. "You're going to fly aircraft that can do incredible things. You're going to find yourselves in situations where everyone tells you what you cannot do. Too dangerous, too damaged, too far, too low on fuel. And in those moments, you're going to have a choice. You could try, or you could decide." Her eyes moved across the room, meeting the gaze of each student in turn. "I'm going to teach you how to fly. But more importantly, I'm going to teach you how to decide. How to look at impossible odds and choose to change them. How to trust the aircraft, trust your training, and trust yourself when everything is falling apart around you." She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had flown through fire and emerged transformed. "Any questions?" A hand went up in the front row. One of the female students, a lieutenant with sharp eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Ma'am, did you ever doubt yourself? When you turned back to help those soldiers, did you ever think you might not make it?" Chun considered the question. The honest answer was complicated, layered with fear and duty, and something that went beyond both. "Every second," she said finally. "I doubted myself every second of that flight. But doubt does not have to stop you. Doubt just means you understand what you are risking. The important thing is what you do next." She picked up the kneeboard again and looked at the crossed-out words. "Tell them I tried." That was doubt talking. Crossing it out was the decision. And the decision is what matters. The classroom was silent. 16 pilots looked at their instructor and understood that they were learning from someone who had lived the lessons she was teaching. Chun tucked the kneeboard back into her flight bag and turned to the whiteboard behind her. "Now, let's talk about emergency procedures for hydraulic failure. You never know when you're going to need them. If this story moved you, if you have ever faced a moment where everyone said you could not do something and you did it anyway, share your story in the comments. And hit subscribe so you do not miss the next story of someone who refused to quit when quitting was the easy choice. Because the world needs more people who decide instead of try.